Hello, I'm Rick Hensley, and welcome to the Secret to a Happy Life podcast. You know, recently I have thought when I was younger, one of the things that determined whether I was happy or not is whether I could communicate effectively with my children. And it was different back then. My kids are all grown now, but now kids speak a totally different language than many times their parents. And parents are having a harder and harder time um, talking with them. So I thought, who do I know and what can I do where I can help really talk about this problem and maybe help some people that might be struggling. And just so happens that a young lady grew up in my house, is now a counselor. And our guest today is Katie Cormack. She's a native of Knoxville, Tennessee. Katie's a wife and a mother with, as I understand, a deep love for music, Diet Coke, and spending time outdoors with her family and friends. She holds a master's degree in school counseling and is an educational specialist degree in instructional leadership. Katie's faith and her own story as a young woman led her to the field of school counseling. And over the past 7 years, Katie's worked across all grade levels in the public school system, from high school and middle school to her current role as elementary school counselor. Her work is driven by the commitment to supporting students and guiding families through the formative years of childhood, with a focus on fostering secure attachments and meaningful family relationships. And I am so proud to say, Katie Cormack, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. This is surreal. I'm so excited just to sit down and have a conversation. That's something I think it is really important. So thank you.
Well, I think it critically is. And, you know, the thing about it is I knew you when you were growing up. And I told you when we were interviewing for this that you've listened to a lot of lectures and me telling you what the way I think things should be. And now it's turned full circle because I'm expecting you to tell me what how to communicate with children.
Right.
And so you're right now, you are counseling elementary school students, correct?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
that,
I've been doing that just this past year, but before that was mostly middle and high school. So it's a different world these days, but I'm loving it.
well, so the whole thing with really text messaging, the way that social media works in today's world is, you know, even for parents that are your age, and you're a mother of one and expecting another, right?
Yes.
And so even for you, it's a different world. And you're a young woman. So
Yeah.
for me, it's a really vastly different world. And there's a lot of stresses on kids in elementary school and middle school and certainly in high school that, you know, there was bullying around when I was growing up, but it wasn't the same way. It was direct one-on-one kind of bullying. Whereas now, you know, you could trip in dance class and in the next 15 minutes, everybody in your school's got a video. And in the next 15 minutes, everybody in your city's got a video. And in the next 15 minutes, literally everybody on earth might have a video or access to that video of what you might be your most embarrassing moment of your life. And so there's no wonder that the pressures and the struggles that kids experience now, that their parents have no understanding of how that could be, because that's not the world that they grew up with. Is that pretty much what you see?
Absolutely. And I think the crazy thing is that it's constantly changing. So even something that may be applied to parents that have 4 and 5-year-olds, just a few years back, things are different and things are constantly changing. And so especially me in my role as a school counselor, that's really important. Why I have to stay up to date on things to be able to give parents accurate advice and things to keep their kids safe and what to look out for and the latest apps and websites. It's constantly changing.
And so the way that you keep up with that is by actually talking with the students, correct?
Yes.
It's not something that there's a message board for all. Do all the counselors get together and say, "Hey, you need to look at this app that's going around everywhere," or maybe they do. Maybe I'm sure you have conferences and you discuss different situations, and that's kind of a fulcrum for all counselors, that they get together and discuss, maybe not specific with names and everything, but situations that they've experienced, so that can help you continue your education.
Right. Yeah. The professional development definitely helps, but so much of what I learn, the lingo, right? The things, the words kids are saying and everything, it's just by being in relationship with them and with them face to face every day. A lot of observation too, just noticing things.
Now, so it's a separate category when that kind of pressure can cause chronic depression,
Mhm.
and chronic depression causes loss of hope, and loss of hope can lead itself to violence or even suicide in certain situations. I know that there was a show that was streaming. I don't know if it was on Netflix or Amazon. It was called Adolescence. Have you heard about that?
I watched it recently with my husband and it was unbelievably powerful. And it was actually really cool to watch that with him. My husband he does not work with children or in the education field at all. He's in the medical field. But our different opinions of he was shocked. Some of the things he would say is this accurate? Is this real? And of course, it's a show, so not every bit of it, but so much of it was shocking to me that yes, there are children treating each other like that online and saying horrible things, and kids that go home and internalize it, and maybe their parents have no idea this secret battle that they're facing. So it was a really great show, and a plug for that. I would recommend anyone to watch it that's an adult.
It was painful to watch, and I've talked to some people about it, and that I've been told that although that particular situation was magnified, they didn't even have time to cover the depth of the real problem, and
Right.
that only touched on the problem that was really social bullying of one guy and the way he reacted. But the reality is it's much bigger and broader than what they could put on a short series.
And there was so much in that show that I really found interesting of the parent dynamics. You saw, especially in the last episode, the guilt. And of course, any parent, anytime something hard happens to your child, you will blame yourself a lot. But I found it so interesting. And I had my own thoughts of just different dynamics in their parent child relationship that I do personally think had an effect. So,
Well, it actually, that was probably the genesis for the idea of doing this podcast with you.
oh,
And
cool.
that is the fact that showed me how little I knew about what was going on in the world of parents and their children. And it reminded me of different times where I felt really inadequate when my children were growing up, and doing the best I could. But hey, if it's literally speaking a different language because you don't understand. And even back then, there was huge differences than it was when I was growing up. So, and it's skyrocketed past that. I mean, when it was, I don't know what before Facebook, was it MySpace or,
MySpace.
yeah. So, and I was always worried about that. And, that's gone by the wayside, and it's gone up by just a multiple that I can't even imagine. So let's talk about what's your daily, what happens to you every day when you go to school, because I'm sure that it's repeated with a lot of kids. And now obviously when new things pop up as far as technology, you have to catch up. But in general, a lot of these kids have some of the same problems, and it's over and over. And I assume that you have to explain to parents what those problems are and how they might be able to deal with them. So what's your average day like?
Oh my goodness, that's the fun part about my job is that every day is truly different. And so I knew, I wanted to work with kids, but I didn't necessarily want to be a classroom teacher. And so I was really close with my school counselor growing up. So I was like, I got to do this. But I guess everything I'm going to share today is from the lens of my career as a whole. It's not just
Right.
this current time working with elementary kids because a lot of my time was spent with older students. So, I think we'll kind of jump in with what my day looks like. I mean, every day is
I
different,
should
but
say what's the average day of a counselor? Let's
yeah,
not define it, and because next year you might be back in middle school.
right,
You know,
right.
so the when parents talk to counselors, do they say, "You're not talking about my kid.
Mhm.
That's not my kid." And
Right,
you're saying, "These are the problems that your kid has." And they're in denial that that exists because they don't see it at home. And even when my kids were young, you say, "How was school?" The answer is fine. Did you learn anything? No.
right.
It's one word answers to probing questions. And then finally, I would throw up my hands and say, well, they don't want to talk.
Yeah.
Well, that's not really the best way to handle that, I assume, particularly today.
For sure. Well, I think that it is interesting in my role is that a lot of times what we see at school is very different than what parents are seeing at home. So that could be that we are, I say a lot of times I'm like the frontline person that has to make really hard phone calls home, whether that's about a mental health concern, a behavioral concern that sometimes can cross the boundary of both. Yes, it's behavioral, but it's also mental health. And then other times it could just be a social concern, of, hey, I've noticed that your child really isn't making a lot of friends and different things. And these are some of the supports that I can have. But many times the parent will be surprised because the child will mask really well at home, or home is their safe space. And so they're just shocked that school is looking like that for their child. Other times, the child masks all day long at school and does amazing and is like the perfect child at school. But then they get in the car with their parent or they get home off the bus and that child has a breakdown. They go to their room, they seclude themselves, they immediately go get on their tablet and try to block the world out. Um, so it's interesting. A lot of times parents are either surprised when I call because it's totally opposite from what they're seeing, or they're not surprised and they're like, thank you for calling me. Overall, that really doesn't surprise me. It just looks really different at home.
Yeah, well, so it's, even for adults, many times we mask, and that actually takes a whole lot of energy. And, you go home and suddenly, you don't have to do that anymore and you're exhausted. So if you could kind of, I know that this is hard to state in general what the problem is in that communication dynamic, but if you could boil it down to something that is shorter, could you do it? Or is it
I,
just so varied that you just have to say, we have to handle it topic by topic?
I do think I could. I think I was talking to a friend recently and it's it comes down to this. Everyone, child, teenager, adult, elderly person, from the time we're born, and there's a person who quoted this, but we all want to feel seen, right? Every person wants to feel seen. We want to feel like, do you get me? Do you see me? Am I lovable? And so again, that's for all of us. I feel that way. And so I think when children start to not feel seen or loved, then that's when we start seeing bigger problems happen. And I'm more than happy. I think a lot of the things that I see kind of boil down to three different categories with concerning mental health behaviors and dangerous behaviors online that I'm happy to share with you today. But I think it all comes down to kids want to feel seen. And for parents, a lot of times it's hard when they get to an age where the relationship can be more strained, those pre-adolescent years, those middle school years, and they are speaking somewhat of a different language. But everything I'm going to say today is there's hope, and there's small things that you can do to try to bridge that gap with your child. I absolutely believe there's hope for that.
Yeah, and at the end, if you could think about some of the resources that might be available that a lot of listeners might not even know exists. So
Absolutely.
we'll go ahead with that. I mean, this is, normally what we do on these podcasts is I say, this is your story. You go, and I can probe a little bit, but this is your field,
Yeah.
and I assume that, I think everybody understands that you want to raise your kids to be independent thinkers. And, a lot of times when they get in high school and they start being independent thinkers, you're not quite prepared for it. But that's a natural growth that, most parents really want to see their kids achieve. But when they're particularly in middle school and they're just reaching the adolescence, I think that everybody can remember in their own life how insecure that you feel when you like another person and you're wondering whether they like you, and maybe they respond in not the most positive way, and you felt anxious. Well, so what it appears now in the world today, that there's an epidemic of anxiety. And it's because all of those things that maybe we felt are 10 times worse now than it was for us. That anxiety level um, is really, really magnified. And I assume that you have to deal with that every single day.
Yes. Yeah. And it is. It's, the numbers speak for itself, and the anxiety and the depression. And I mean, this is a hard fact to hear, but there's an estimated 2 million adolescents that attempt suicide every single year. And so there's just every single one of those people, there's stories, and I look at those numbers, and I think obviously COVID didn't help. Obviously, I do think social media, and I have strong opinions on giving children smartphones at a young age. I think there's a lot of things, but yeah, I do feel like there are some small things that are really helpful no matter when I look back on elementary kids, middle school, high school kids that I've worked with. You want to know one of the the number one things I recommend for parents that their kids having a hard time?
What's that?
It's very basic. Is your child, do they have a hobby or an interest where they have devoted time to spend to that every single week? Now, that could be that your elementary student loves to collect rocks. Like, I'm not kidding. It could be something as simple as that. Do they have free time after school where they have undirected time where they can go outside and find those, and then time to show you where get excited about what they find?
Right.
Maybe your child is in middle school and they're on the track team, or maybe your child is in high school and they're a part of the debate team. Every kid needs a place where they feel free to be themselves. They have like-minded people that are also passionate about those same hobbies and interests. And then they have someone that's like rooting for them, of maybe they don't even understand it. I don't get your rock collection, but tell me about it. And so I just think the kids that I've seen 180 positive shifts with, no matter if it was a mental health concern or a behavior concern, a lot of times it was as simple as asking the parent, hey, what can we get them involved with? And so I know sometimes finances are a thing where maybe your schedule is super, super busy, or you don't have the money to spend thousands of dollars on travel soccer. I'm not saying that parents need to do that. It can look
Right.
different for every kid. And also, that's another thing. If you have 3, 4 children that you're trying to hop around here, there, and everywhere, I know that it's hard. But I do think if there's any way you can like look at your family calendar and just figure out a time where every kid, even if it's once or twice a week, that they have time to feel supported in an extracurricular or a hobby to find their strengths, I think that's really powerful.
Do you recommend that parents steer away from technology in those avocations for their kids? Because there's a lot of kids that, even little kids, you stick an iPad in their hand and it's crack,
Mhm.
and that's not really engaging in anything other than visually. It's we all, I think, from my generation, I don't know if yours, probably, we liked cartoons when we were really young and they were captivating and we could learn things from that. Well, but now, as a kid, even elementary students, they get into gaming and, so they say, oh, the thing that I'm interested in, mom and dad, is being on a computer and interacting with somebody over in Sweden. And, do you steer parents away from that? That's a lot different than collecting rocks or fishing or being on the debate club or playing a sport or having a team activity. Those are things that you actually have to physically, participate in. Whereas technology today, the statistics that you read about, and even for me, when I see the statistics of how much I'm on my phone on a daily basis. Now, I am not active on social media. Um, and I think it's a generational thing of me wanting to have some sort of an illusion of privacy. But even at that, it's a lot of hours. I use my phone for business, and it's a lot of hours reading and looking at it. But kids, there's some kids that are average 16 hours a day. That's
Right.
your waking hours.
And that's not an exaggeration what you said. Like I mean, that's a whole nother thing is there's parents I've had to call and I'm like, hey, your child admitted to me that they were on their device for 9 hours last night when you thought they were sleeping. So I think to answer your question, um, I I'm not big on extremes one way or the other. Okay. So there are people out there that, to each their own, they do believe that children should be completely screen free. I take a bit more of a realistic approach that my son is going to be around screens at some point, whether it's for the first time when he's 5 years old and he goes to school and they're doing a brain break in class,
Right.
or the kindergartners are given Chromebooks these days. Like they all have a device. So for me personally, I want to teach him to use that in a healthy way with boundaries. And that's another thing, big on boundaries. Kids want boundaries. So I think if you are looking to have your child find their strengths, their hobbies, their interests, you have to have parameters and boundaries on technology. And you can literally look it up. What's a healthy amount of screen time for a 2-year-old a day? That's one Google search away. And then you can kind of figure that out for yourself and your family and what works. I'm very passionate on, my son does have a tablet that we use for like long car rides and stuff. We're not just completely screen free, but me and my husband have to be very aware that when we go down to a restaurant, what's the easy thing to do? It's to pull out the tablet right away. But that's not truly benefiting that connection piece with my child.
Huh.
And I have seen when that continues and continues and continues, that connection gets further broken, then you do have a middle schooler on your hand who's having much more serious issues and kind of living this secret life. So again, I think to answer it, I'm not all for completely screen free, no technology, but I do think there's got to be some healthy boundaries, and the children in your home have to understand ultimately you are the adult, and there has to be a level of respect for what you say goes when it comes to the technology piece.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when I was growing up, obviously there were no cell phones, but there were home phones, and parents had to put boundaries on their kids on how much time they spent on the phone at night. Otherwise, the phone was tied up and nobody else could ever call and tell you if they needed you or anything else. And so, but it's really easy to spend hours doing anything like that. And so it's with technology, those iPads are like the best babysitter that you could ever have, because they are the algorithms for the things that they watch. Even the streaming shows are meant to keep their attention continuously, and it works. Now, it might have worked that way watching Snow White when you were a little kid. You liked Snow White, and you would be able to sit and watch an hour and a half movie when otherwise you couldn't sit and do anything for an hour and a half because your attention span was, you're bouncing around when you're a kid. Now that is so magnified that those boundaries, is there any place that can advise parents on how to come up with those boundaries? Because it's I kind of equate it to everybody likes ice cream, but you don't want to let your kid eat ice cream every day, all day, because obviously that's going to be something that's everybody would accept is not healthy.
Right.
So it's the same thing with the technologies. Are there any resources that can advise you on how to create those boundaries, and what is a reasonable amount of time? Now,
Mhm.
granted, those are made by people that aren't young, and so when you say, "Oh, you can click on the internet and it tells you how much a 2-year-old should watch an iPad in a healthy way," well, how does anybody know? I mean, it's not like it's been around for everybody forever. But I assume that there's people that study that come up with some ideas that might be able to give you some ideas.
Yes. So I think there's a lot of thoughts that I'm having. So one of my favorite resources, it's not just necessarily for screen time, just it's kind of all encompassing for online safety with your children. It's FOSI.org, and that stands for Family Online Safety Institute.
Okay.
And it's so cool. They have all these free PDFs that give tips for parents. You can filter their resources by, like, if you are having issues with your child on a tablet, or if you want some guidance for gaming systems or apps, setting your parental controls. Because even like you said, I'm have a 2-year-old, so I'm fairly younger parent, but things are changing, and every iPhone with the latest update, it gets harder to understand, like, how do I do this now? So it breaks all of that down for you.
I would bet that site also gives updates as technology updates too. It's not just a static view that's going to be there forever. It's as technology changes, which in the next 5 years, it's going to make the last 10 years seem small, and
Correct.
that's probably always the way it is.
Yeah, they'll probably have something for AI out there here soon, how to keep your kids safe with AI. But it's one of the other things I like, Rick, is that it has safety agreements, so parents can personalize it to, it's sitting down and having a conversation with your child of, hey, I'm about to give you this tablet or this iPhone or this laptop, whatever it is. Here is my parameters. I'm telling you from the beginning, as your parent, this is kind of how it goes. You can, whether that's the amount of screen time or how they're intended to use it, how you're going to have access to their passwords, all of the tips that I normally recommend that parents do. It's really cool that you can personalize it, and then you can put your child's name on it and you can print it off, and it can kind of be hung in a commons area that, again, if your child breaks that, it's kind of like, hey, you've broken my trust and we're going to take a break from this for now, that until we can have a mutual understanding, it seems like you're not quite ready for this. So,
Well, so the whole idea of parental controls on all digital equipment, um, I think, is a really great idea. I have an instance. I don't know if I've ever told you, when our kids were really young, we had a computer upstairs, and they would go on to Disney and things like that. But we had not really thought about the parental controls, and they went on to girls.com,
right.
and girls.com to them were going to be about cheerleading or dance or
Yes.
whatever, but it wasn't. It was a porn site. Now, I was fortunate enough that I was around and I heard it like within 15 seconds. But the thing about it is, I hadn't thought that I should have put parental controls on that computer
Mhm.
before because I didn't even think that they were capable of going anywhere other than that they would even think about going anywhere other than Disney or some of the other sites that they, that was before iPads were even around. So it's the same kind of thing with the internet is those parental controls have to be established pretty early. And the place that you were describing before, what was the name of it again? The site?
Family Online Safety Institute.
So that can give some advice on parental controls so you can, I don't think parents are negligent. I just think that you just don't know any better
You
because there,
don't know what you don't know.
yeah, there's no handbook. Even for you, you're a counselor. You counsel these kids. That's your career. It's challenges with your 2-year-old,
Yeah.
right? You'd think that hey, you'd be the expert. You've gone to school. You've spent a lot of time. Yet there's challenges even for you with a 2-year-old. So that's a great site that some parents can look at. So what are some of the examples of how this has displayed for you throughout your career with these kids dealing with anxieties that really weren't present for?
Yeah. Wow. There's so many. So a lot of the examples I'm going to give today are, obviously at respecting confidentiality of students, but some of the examples are not even my own students, but they're from other just stories that I've heard, like sharing at professional developments, hearing from other co-counselors. And it's interesting that a lot of these are common situations that we're all seeing. So across all grade levels, all different types of schools and different communities, public, private, you name it. It's similar things that we're seeing. So, with the anxiety that you're talking about, one of the biggest things that we see is students that struggle with school avoidance. So they may be students that it is a battle every single morning to get them into the car, or maybe you get them into the car, but then you pull up to the school and it's like World War III trying to get them out of your car. And so, um, there's one student, it kept on going, kept on going, kept on going, and then that student figured out that if they, it got bad enough and they started coming and saying they were having suicidal thoughts, that mom would come pick them up. And so maybe it's not even that, right? It's the student that's saying their stomach hurts every single day going to the clinic. So mom or dad, whoever comes and picks them up. So what we have to recognize here is when we take a closer look, whether it's the suicidal or, their stomach hurts, maybe they really are feeling that way. The anxiety really is manifesting as a stomach ache, or they really are having those suicidal thoughts. If you go back a few steps, the issue is that at one point the parent did come back and get them, and then they did it the next time, and then they did it the next time, and then it
So it
develops
was positive reinforcement of
positive
that being,
reinforcement. And
yeah.
that's so hard to tell a parent, because ultimately it's a lot of factors. It's not the parent's fault. And again, it's hard not to want to go save your child. But I think the bigger thing is figuring out what is it about school that is triggering, or what is it about, leaving mom or dad that is triggering. There's some level of unhealthy attachment there. And so we have to be comfortable with helping our kids do hard things. And so something that I'm literally already trying to teach my 2-year-old, and I make him repeat it after me, I can do hard things, right? Because even us, we have to do hard things every day. There's days I don't want to go to work, or, I'm scared to go have a difficult meeting that I have to lead, or whatever, fill in the blank.
That's a hard thing for adults,
It
regardless of
is.
children. But
Yes. And so I think again, I go back to that, helping your kids feel confident in themselves, whether that is getting them involved in extracurricular activities or a hobby, or reaching out to their school counselor. Maybe they're not having friends, reaching out to their teacher. What is their social circle like at school? There was one parent I knew that she didn't know that her daughter had been kind of playing alone by herself on the playground. And so I applaud that parent that they reached out to the teacher to say, hey, is she having friends? What is that like? Therefore, we figured out, no, she really wasn't making those deep friendships. And so from there, we were able to get her plugged in and get some extra counseling supports, help her make friends. And then that fixed a lot of the issues. I mean, I know I can only speak for, our school, but there's lots of resources at school where if your child's having a tough time, we can get like a safe, trusted person that gets that routine going, that we can meet your child. There's lots of creative things we can do to help get them in the building. So I think we're seeing a lot of anxious kids that are avoiding school. So a lot of kids that I've seen that maybe are struggling with suicidality or self-harm. They need an outlet. They need somewhere to feel like they matter, like they're seen, like they're good at something. Maybe academics aren't their thing. That's okay. Not every kid's going to be a straight A student, but where are they shining? Do they have a place where they can shine? That matters.
So when you recognize that your kid is feeling depressed, they seem withdrawn. Do you have any, are there resources that can teach you how to communicate with those kids?
Absolutely. There's tons. I would say, first of all, having those honest conversations of, hey, I've noticed that you seem more sad recently. Do you want to talk about it? Starting there, just trying to, sitting at the foot of their bed, trying to engage in those conversations. Kids, even if they immediately shut you out, I'm fine. I'm fine, they're obviously not fine. And so for you to just continually show up for them, and obviously you don't want to be a burden and constantly poke the bear, but I would say starting with that is really important. And I'm going to share another little fun tip I have with that in a minute, but um, always feel comfortable reaching out to their school counselor or seeking out other supports with mental health therapists. So if you start to notice some of those red flags, my child is retreating, they're trying to isolate more, they're displaying weird sleeping patterns or eating patterns, they are just seeming melancholy or even more oppositional and defiant behaviors, those are all things you don't just want to turn a blind eye
The
to.
the problem is that every kid has times that are like that, Katie.
Hmm.
I mean, that's the challenge of parenting is every kid has that
Yeah.
at different times. Every kid, and when parents the issue of bullying, even when it's direct bullying, and I'm not talking about online, is parents become defensive and protective of their kid, but that's not necessarily the solution,
Right.
right? So it's teaching your kid how to deal with those head-to-head problems, or even expanded where it's social media, how to deal with problems in life, because it continues to happen even when you're an adult.
Hmm.
You have those kinds of challenges in your work and in your own social life, and many of us may have not learned how to deal with that effectively, so you become really defensive of your kid. And I'm sure that you get some parents that sound pretty defensive to you when you
Yeah.
say, "Hey, Jimmy's having a problem on the playground. He's not doing not no. You just don't know what you're talking about, right?"
Right.
And then you have to, I guess, you learn how to communicate with parents that way.
Right.
It's up and down the ladder for you, I'm sure.
It is. Well, and I think what you said is really important. And it's true that, yes, every kid is going to have, times where they have weird sleeping patterns or eating patterns or they withdraw. I mean, that's adolescence. That's a normal thing. Hey, mom, drop me off around the corner so no one sees you with me. Like, that's a normal part of child development. So, what I would say is, I don't want anyone listening to this to think, oh, goodness, that's my kid. It's when there is a concern that lasts longer than 2 weeks that is atypical from normal behavior. So your child, and I think the biggest thing is again, not being afraid to say, hey, I'm going to have another adult just check in on my child, because sometimes even parents with really close, good relationships with their kids just want a different adult, an unbiased third party person to check in on them. Not every kid has a mentor that's a coach or their youth leader or someone in their life or a great relationship with their aunt or uncle, someone that's different from their parents.
I think that we can all identify the fact that sometimes you listen to people that weren't your parents more closely than you did your parents, because your parents, it becomes white noise over time, you know,
Absolutely.
and so you know, I, it's funny because as far as the generationally, I'm a baby boomer, right? So my response to any of this is, let's work the problem,
Right.
and also as a male, let's work the problem and let's fix the problem and let's move on. Well, that's not really um, the way the world is now. It might have been that way for me, and that may have been healthy or unhealthy for me as a kid growing up with that kind of attitude. But that's not really the way that kids communicate now. It's the problem is being able to identify the problem.
Hmm.
They can't express what the problem is.
Hmm.
It's just a feeling. Oh my
Right.
gosh, a feeling. Well, what do you mean, a feeling?
Yeah.
You can't, and that's, I think, the biggest difficulty with all of it is, and that's what's created what I started out the podcast with, and that is that kids speak a different language.
They do. They do. And I mean, even me being a millennial and raising what I think my son's like Gen Alpha, my soon to be daughter is going to be a Gen Beta. It's constantly
Yeah,
changing.
I can't keep up with
I can't
all of
either. And
that.
I probably got all that wrong anyways, but I
I
know I'm a
just,
millennial.
I just got, I had a discussion with one of my daughters just in the last week or two. And for the first time ever, the response that she gave me was something that I actually listened to. And that she said, "Oh, what a baby boomer response that is." And I was like, "What do you mean?"
Yeah, you're like, ouch,
It's
that one hurt.
it's the right response. No, no, not necessarily. You need to think about, the root of the problem and try to discover that and have a little empathy
Yep.
versus just, get off your butt and let's move on.
Hmm.
So
Well, something you said a few seconds ago reminded me of another tip that I have for parents, that it's not just for kids. Like, this is a great resource for all of us. Cause again, I'm learning things a lot of days in my role as a counselor where I'm like, wait, that helps me. Like, I needed that. Have you ever heard of something called the zones of regulation?
no.
Okay, well, that's another thing that you and all of the listeners should look into. Whether you're a parent or not, again, it's great for yourself, but basically, zones of regulation, you can look it up. It's a website. They also have a curriculum and more things that you can buy, but they have a lot of free resources that basically breaks down emotions into 4 different colors: red, yellow, green, and blue. And so I always tell my kids, green is good, right? There's no bad emotions, but green is kind of baseline of I'm feeling in control over my body and control over my emotions. And the whole scale of the colors is based on the amount of energy that it takes your body to exert that emotion. And so blue is like calm, but it's also sad. And a lot of the things that I use with kids that have, if you've ever seen the movie Inside Out, it's a great Disney cartoon movie about all of our feelings. But like, you can even put the cartoon characters from Inside Out into the different color boxes. And so what's great is it never shames a child for feeling anger, which is red, which makes sense, right? Anger, we feel red inside. But it helps kids understand, okay, if I need to get back to green right now, what are some of the things that I can do? And so, I mean, I tell parents, hey, if your kid's in the red and it's a safe space and you're able, give them a punching bag. Like, let them get that anger out, right? We all have moments where we just need to go scream into our pillow or go for a run. Anything to get you back to that baseline. I think I've just learned a lot from zones of regulation. I've told tons of parents about it. I tell teachers about it. I even use it. And so I would say that's a really good resource that I don't want to forget to mention while we talk.
I think that that is golden because, um, everybody can relate to the fact that sometimes you just have to let out a little scream and suddenly that kind of lowers the temperature because you've let out that emotion.
You have to get it out or else it's going to come out in another unhealthy way. Sometimes you got to have your favorite sad playlist on and bawl your eyes out alone in your car. Like we need to model that. So that's another piece is like modeling that for our kids. And even if it's, hey, mommy got really, really angry earlier and I raised my voice and lost my cool. I was angry, but I did this. I'm feeling better now. Do you forgive me? Right? Like that's a conversation I can have with my 2-year-old. Now it takes effort. And so I just think that kids know that no parent is perfect. We're not perfect. None of us should pretend to be perfect. And so just owning those moments where it's like, whoa, even I lost my cool. And we can use that language, right? Hey, mommy was in the red. I'm feeling better. I'm in the green now. I just think it's a really cool visualization that speaks across all different generations and age levels, that if you can relate it to a color and figure it out, like yellow is silly, mommy's feeling yellow right now. Like it's just a really cool way to connect with your kids.
I'd say that that's, that works from even really the youngest of ages because they can understand those colors, and it's that's interesting. And so, at what age do kids get where they realize that they're not in the cool set? They're not in the they're not with the cool group, and they're isolated because maybe they're not a great athlete, maybe
Mhm.
they don't feel like they dress as well as everybody else, and they start understanding that they're not in that set that's popular. I mean,
Mhm.
that's always been the case, but again, with the way that social media is now, that's really super magnified. Um, you see all the people that are really popular, and you emulate them. It's always been that way, and it's with that way with fashion and everything else. But I think that kids earlier and earlier are identifying that, hey, I'm not beautiful like they are, or
Yeah.
I'm not as agile as an athlete as they are. Even if in grade school when you're playing kickball or whatever, there's alphas and there's kids that aren't alphas.
Right. I think it happens much earlier than people realize. That is one of the surprising things that I have found, even with working with elementary now, is wow, kids are very observant and aware of things. And yes, I think the social media and smartphones and everything doesn't help that, whether it's elementary or middle. Back in the day, there may be a sleepover happening that I wasn't invited to, but to be honest, I had no idea I wasn't invited to it.
Right.
And now it's in your face. Oh, those 3 people that I thought were my best friends, they're having a sleepover tonight and I'm not invited.
And it can feel crushing.
Absolutely. And at that age, it feels like the end of the world. And so again, that's why I'm really big on, I personally don't feel that children should have social media until they're at least in high school. And I firmly believe that. Now, I'm not saying no
How pre-
smartphones.
how prevalent is that?
Social media, there is elementary students that have
Well,
social
well, I'm talking
media.
about, are there a lot of parents that would agree with what you're saying, that actually actively do that, or would that be the minority?
I would say that I think parents are starting to realize the benefit of waiting. And again, we're not saying your kids have no social media or no smartphones till they go to college, because then you're going to shelter them and then it's going to be a rude awakening. But I do think a lot of parents are learning more and understanding the second that you put a smartphone in front of your child and give them social media, you're really stripping them of the opportunity to live everything that's right in front of them. And I saw a clip. It was Matthew McConaughey recently, and he was on the Today Show or something. And it's fascinating. You should look it up. He him and his wife took a pretty strong stance on they were not letting their son, even at 15, have social media because they were like, you're going to go live the life that's actually in front of you, not the life that's behind a screen. And it showed him surfing and doing all this cool stuff. And it wasn't to post a video about it. It was surfing to simply go surf because he liked to surf. And so, yeah, I just think, again, I haven't crossed that bridge yet. And there's zero judgment of parents are going to do what you feel is best for your child. And every child is different. Every home is different. But for me, I just have seen too much where I'm going to wait.
Listen, I think it's about education. It's not
Yeah.
about parents not willing to do it. It's about parents not knowing any better.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast with you, is to help parents get a little education,
Mhm.
and so they can know better.
Yeah. Can I
I
tell
mean,
you one other story that comes
yeah,
to mind, that
yeah.
the knowing better? So there's a student that truly, parents had all good intentions, but this young child, they were playing a game. I don't know. Have you ever heard of Roblox?
No.
I don't even fully understand the game, but it seems very innocent. Like they're almost like little robots. And it's kind of like The Sims when I was growing up, where you can have them do things and live lives and create little friend groups
I
and
didn't
stuff.
understand that either, even back then, but go ahead.
I mean, it's like this fake reality game, but it's no harm. It seems really innocent. It's seems very child friendly for even younger children.
Right.
And so again, I guess the parents let their child use it and didn't understand. This person, this child started, they got a friend request from someone who was pretending to be another child. And it looked great, looked safe, no big issue. They were playing Roblox. Well, then that other person was not a child, but they invited that child to get on a different website or app called Discord, which many of you have heard of Discord. It's like a chatting app. My husband uses it for gaming. But next thing you know, you have a young child messaging who they thought was also another young child on Discord. It was not. It was a grown man who wanted the child to send them inappropriate pictures and videos. Next thing you know, school is involved. Next thing you know, law enforcement is involved. And here's the deal, that child was fine. They got the help that they needed to make that situation stop. But who knows what that child was exposed to? Who knows what that child was asked to do? Pictures, videos, who knows? I mean, there's some things that just the child knows that. And so,
Well, so that that brings to for me a little old school, because the whole internet stalking thing
mm,
has been going on as long as the internet's been there.
yeah.
And I can remember a police officer coming to school when our kids were 11, 12, 13 years old, and giving us education that scared us to death,
Hmm.
because they had real world situations where, and the story that you're telling was an almost story. It's almost what could have happened. The stories that this police officer was telling were stories that did happen,
Right.
and where kids did fall into this situation and they did meet this person and they were molested and they were scarred for, probably, their whole life. That was a formative thing that happened to them that shouldn't have ever happened. And so we became super protective of that and talked to all of our kids and all of our kids' friends about the harms of doing this. Don't be stupid. This is, you need to be super careful. You need to be really vigilant. The problem is that was on an internet that was a baby. Now the internet is pervasive. And so a lot of that stuff has to be happening more and more and more. And so that's one reason that, like I said, parents have to be educated and they can't be naive to what the treacheries of the world,
Hmm.
because all parents, virtually all parents, live to protect their children. I mean,
Right.
I'm not going to diss any parents. We all make mistakes, but we live to protect our kids. The thing that we've got to figure out is we've got to be educated in what to protect them from, because we don't have any idea. It's not like, older times you knew that, hey, you didn't go outside at night because there were wolves out there. You protected your kids by not letting them leave the cave. Well, now it's harder because, every generation kids have the opportunity to grow up a lot faster than the previous generation had any idea was even possible. So you've given some good ideas in terms of communicating, in terms of counselors at the school, some resources as far as websites um, that can help educate. And are there community forums or anything like that where, I mean, we had what I always thought, the parent underground, where, you know, hey, we would secretly talk to other parents about what was going on so they would be able to tell us what was going on in friend groups without kids ever knowing that we knew.
Oh, interesting.
So we could prepare and protect our kids. And some of that might have been fair or not fair, that, hey, Johnny is, and Johnny's not your kid, but Johnny's out there and he's, you know, drinking like a sailor. So what we did is we made sure that our kids didn't hang out with Johnny. Now, we were just protecting them. And if we knew Johnny's parents, I would call Johnny's parents and say, hey, you need to watch out, Johnny. I've heard Johnny's been drinking a little bit. You just need to be aware. So they can, now I'm not getting in their business because I'm not Johnny's parent. I was, self-rule was really important to us baby boomers. And so, but Johnny's parents would likely say, Johnny, they would watch. And if they found out, then Johnny would face some measure of consequence from it and hopefully curtail that problem. But whether they handled it or not, for a while, I wasn't going to let our kids be around Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of community, I assume that there's some community communication through schools, and I guess PTA is still an active thing.
Yeah.
But
I would say
parents talk.
they do. Yeah. And I would say, yes, there's lots of Facebook forums and groups you can be a part of. And those are all great things. Like I'm a part of, some of the smaller areas of town, like neighborhood wise. I'm a part of some of those groups for even moms and stuff. That's not a bad thing. But I would say everything you were saying just now, I think that worked back when you were raising children, and that still works. There's something to be said for having real life conversations with other parents. And I think
There's always the risk, though, of becoming a helicopter parent.
for sure. But I also think, I don't know, I think assume positive intent is something that my mom always raised me to remember is, if you are that parent that gets that phone call about your child, don't just assume that the other parent is like calling to try to get your kid in trouble, or you don't know my kid. Maybe there's part of what they said is true, so let's take a closer look, or let's just keep an eye on it. But I think, being that parent that has to make the call and be worried, or hey, even if it's your child just seems sad recently, I've seen him at a few baseball games and I'm just, checking in if you want to have a play date soon or something. Those things, again, we all want to feel seen, that someone sees us. And so I think those things can be really powerful, but I also just think there's something to be said for being visible. So you're going to find out a lot about your kids and other kids if you're just where they're at. We can't be at everything. Absolutely not. We can't be at their school day 8 hours a day.
Right.
But I think trying to do as much as you can within what works for your schedule of, hey, I'm going to go to these after school events, or if there's a day where I can go on that field trip, I'm going to go. You're going to learn a lot about your kids' friends in their class just going on one field trip.
Oh, I've got a good hack to tell you, and
Yeah.
I used that I think would still be effective today is, as you know, I have 4 daughters, and all kids have bunches of friends, and they run in packs, and we oftentimes we're taking 5 or 6 or sometimes even 7 kids at once. As a parent, if you just shut up and listen, after a
Mhm.
couple of minutes, it's almost like they forget you're even there because they start talking with each other and doing their normal talk. And as long as you're not interrupting and making yourself known as, hey, you're the square adult driving the car, you can actually really learn a lot about what's going on by not commenting, just by listening. Because Katie would say something from the back row about, oh, did you hear that this happened or this happened? And then suddenly they're all really talking about what really happened. You're not included. And if you say something, it suddenly gets silent. But if you don't say anything, that's a great resource to be able to find out what's really going on in the school and your kid's life, and kind of like the attitudes of what's going on in your kid's friends group.
I love that. And that's easier for some than others. But honestly, if we would all just shut up and listen, I think that's powerful.
Well, sometimes that's hard. It was hard for me because I always wanted to participate, as you're probably aware.
A
So
little. You were
just a little.
you did a great job of we felt safe to always come to you with things, and you would tell it like it is, but there was no judgment.
No,
So,
I wasn't a big judger. Yeah,
yeah.
mostly because my idea was that, hey, you guys need to figure out how to make right or wrong decisions, and it wasn't my decision. It was my role to try to make you look at all areas to make a good decision for yourself. And that leads me to another question that I don't know if you see, but I've read a lot about that. There's been a resurgent in churches,
Mhm.
and that because we're living in a world, I said this to you before, we're the most connected this world has ever been, and we're also the most disconnected because of the forces of society coming through that, I'm on opposing positions, either politically or philosophically or whatever. And there's been a lot of talk about the fact that, and not all churches are this way, but I think a lot of churches, they all want to be this way, and that is they want to be inclusive, right? Regardless of where you're at, they want they want you to, faith is really about hope, or hope is about faith, one or the other. But generally, churches are trying to deliver hope. And that's something that the world is really needs right now, because this discord, all over. So I've read that there's been, ironically, because, um, churches or religion in general has shrunk in my lifetime. And I've heard that now it's beginning to expand because people are figuring out that they need that kind of community. Not going back to, the title of our podcast is Secret to a Happy Life, and the reality is there's been lots of studies and there's lots of data. It's about relationship, and community. Being a part of a community is about relationship, whether that community is a family or expanded or a church, or it's about relationship. And that's the secret to a happy life, right? And or that's one of the tenets. And you can transfer like that to, faith for a lot of people is the secret to their happy life. But really, faith is about relationship, right? So, uh, so you're seeing that in your counseling. You're seeing that people are being more active in church, or no?
I not necessarily in like my day to day, working with students, but I have noticed that in my own like personal life and even just observing kind of the climate around where I'm at. Absolutely. And so
Uh,
everything you're saying, I would agree with it. And it was like, oh, that's what I've thought. I do think that it all comes back to that relationship. And I will say that I think there are a lot of resources for families that are, no matter what kind of church you go to, what religion or denomination, you name it, there is a place of connection when your family has that faith piece of, even if you have a home church, right? You go meet in someone that's your
right.
friend's house like once a week and there's 5 other families. It's not even a formal church. It's that faith piece of having that community is really powerful.
Yeah, so I'm not a professional like you are, but as you well know, I am opinionated, and I think that the thing that I'm learning from doing this podcast with a variety of different people is, if I'm going to give advice about how parents can communicate with their children, is develop that community, and those communities are available in a variety of different um, churches. And the thing about it is finding one that fits the way that you think that you're comfortable with, and going from that, because all those churches have youth groups. All those youth groups are really, they're trying to help your kid be able to make their way through life in a way that makes sense to them. And they're using, most situations, they're using the Bible in some way to do that. And the Bible is really about establishing society and community.
Right.
So it's not that far of a stretch. You don't have to be, it's not necessarily being a Bible thumper to say that those churches have communities and youth groups that can be valuable to your
Mm-hmm.
child, and have them feel inclusive if they start feeling lesser than. Because I would believe that in a church community, um, those youth groups are less segmented than school groups.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, all of that is true for the resources it provides for students. But, I'm even thinking about the church that me and my husband have been attending for like the last 10 years. There's, as we've become parents ourselves, there's resources that we didn't even know were available at our church. There's a group that meets and it's called Raise Up. And it's for parents that, hey, let's get together with other parents. What issues are you seeing? Let's talk about all these different things. Probably online safety is one of them, but it's like, there's just resources for not just the children. It's parenting is a hard season of life. It's an amazing season of life, but we all need hope. And so a lot of time that hope is found in having those relationships with other people that are going through the hard thing too.
Okay, so we've established that. Listen, the advice is to communicate with your counselor at school.
Mm-hmm.
The advice is there's some websites that are resources that can give you information where you don't feel alone and you can get educated. And that we've established that, hey, maybe it's a good idea to establish community within a local church that you're comfortable with. You happy with those premises that we've covered?
I love it. Can I give one final bow on top advice for parents of
Absolutely.
all ages?
Absolutely.
I did not create this. I take zero credit, but it's something I'm trying to practice again myself. I want to practice what I preach. It's called special time. And it's 15 minutes a day that you as a parent are, you don't give any questions to your child, you give no demands, and you just spend time with them. and it's special time. And people call it a lot of different things. It's, the 15-minute whatever, but I call it special time. So for me, it's right when you get home from work, put your phone down, because that's another thing, no technology. If you can. I know some people are on call and have jobs where you truly have to have your phone, but if you can, and just connect with your kid, let them guide what do you want to do. So if that's for your 13-year-old, they want to take a drive, go take a drive, right? Let them tell you what roads to turn down. If it's for your 2-year-old, they want to play with blocks. Okay, we're going to play with blocks and you have all of my attention for 15 minutes. And then you let them know, hey, our 15 minutes is up. I have to go cook dinner now, or I have to go put a load of laundry in, or whatever it is. They understand, life doesn't revolve around them 24/7. But I think if kids could have that special time with at least one parent or guardian, whoever that might be, a day, I think that would be transformative. And there's a lot of research behind it. So that would be like my last final piece of
That's a
advice.
great one.
Special time. And it's easy. It doesn't need to cost a thing. But again, what I said at the beginning, we all want to feel seen. And I think that helps the connection for both sides, for parents and kids, that your kid sees you too, and you want to feel seen. And so I think that's my final piece of advice, that if you hear nothing.
That is great.
Yeah.
I do have a special request for you.
Okay.
And the fact is, this is such a broad topic that we've only been able to touch on some of the issues that are going on. Can I get you to agree to come back for episode 2 and episode 3, where we really dig down into some specific situations and problems with those communication barriers with kids and what's going on with kids, so we can really, you can do a broader education base for these parents.
Absolutely. I'd be honored. And again, you called me an expert. I am no expert. I'm figuring things out as well as I go, but I always want to be transparent and offer kind of just my own honest thoughts on things that I'm seeing in my own life or in my professional field. So I'd be honored to come back.
Well, maybe even on some future episodes, we can have you. And I think that you're an expert because this is what your field of study was. This is what your field of work is. I'm not suggesting that you know everything about everything. However, you know a lot more than I do. And I think a whole lot of parents out there. And it's really, you've given great advice and great examples. Maybe we can even get a third participant that would be maybe a psychologist that could team up and give some certain circumstances of kids that they've dealt with that might, again, be helpful. But I want to thank you so much for giving your time to do this. You were great, and you really taught me a lot.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and you taught me some stuff along the way as well.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon, Katie.
Thanks. Bye, Rick.
All right. Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for listening. Please go to secrettoahappylife.com to comment or nominate a guest that you think has a great story about their pursuit of happiness. Download other episodes wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And remember, grace, hope, and forgiveness. Happiness is a choice.